Hey guys, Tony from FreshCap here, and a little while ago I posted a picture of a mini reishi greenhouse that I was growing, and a lot of people were chiming in asking if I could post a video about how to do it. Now I'm happy to say that yes, this is that video, but when I was originally doing this project I wasn't planning on making a video of it, but luckily I still have enough footage to put together what's hopefully an awesome step-by-step tutorial so you can do the same thing at home, and also hopefully you're watching this video early enough that you can still do it this season. Also, if you stick around to the end of the video, I want to show you another couple methods that people are using to do some really cool things with reishi, like make a reishi bonsai, and also what method people use to grow reishi, like this big giant one behind me. For this mini reishi greenhouse, the basic process is just taking fully colonized fruiting blocks, burying them in a thin layer of soil, then covering them in poly sheeting and shade cloth. Once the blocks are in there, they'll start to form little pins, which will turn into antlers and eventually turn into big, beautiful reishi conchs that you can harvest and use for medicinal purposes. So again, it's super easy to do, and you should be able to do it at home no matter what your level of skill of mushroom growing is. But first you might be wondering, what is reishi mushroom and why would I even want to grow it in the first place? Really quickly, reishi is a medicinal mushroom that's typically used for immune support, for allergy support, and all sorts of other medicinal purposes. Now, it's not a gourmet mushroom. It's extremely tough and woody, and you won't use it in the kitchen like you would some of the other gourmet mushrooms. It's also extremely bitter. So reishi is specifically just a medicinal mushroom, and obviously also kind of a decorative mushroom because it is quite beautiful. So instead of using it in the kitchen, reishi is typically dried, cut into slices, and then added to tinctures or made into teas, or even just ground into a medicinal powder that you can add to your coffee or tea or whatever. Reishi mushroom is one of those oddballs that is a warm weather species, so it likes the heat, it likes high humidity, and that's why the method I'm going to show you today works so well. So again, the method that we're going to be using today really tries to mimic the natural method of cultivation. How this is done is they take real hardwood logs, they inoculate them with reishi mycelium, and then they plant them under a thin layer of dirt in these greenhouses and shade houses outdoors in places that naturally have hot, humid climates, and they grow them over the summer. Now, reishi is a pretty slow growing mushroom, so from the point of inoculation to the point of harvest takes about 9 months. And when the reishi are growing the best is when it's the hottest. So they grow the strongest throughout July and August and those warmer temperatures. So if you're going to be doing this method, it's best to do it typically around the same time that you're going to plant your garden outside. So in the spring or in the summer when you expect a reasonably long season of warm weather. Now, the way we're going to do it doesn't take 9 months. It takes between 1 and 2 months. So you do have a pretty large window of opportunity to get it done during the summer. But again, you want to start this in the spring or later in the summer when you have those right temperatures. So the first step for the mini reishi greenhouse grow is to actually make the fruiting blocks. Now for this, I just used a simple recipe of hardwood sawdust and bran, and then I inoculated it with grain spawn of the reishi mushroom. And reishi grows really fast throughout the substrate, so it only takes about a week or so before the block is fully colonized. And about a week after that, it will already start to form little antlers or little tiny pins on the top of the block, which means they're ready to fruit, and you can already take them outside and plant them. Now, if you're new to mushroom growing, or if you don't have a pressure cooker and some of the other equipment that's required to actually make the reishi mushroom blocks, you can just go ahead and buy a fully colonized pre-made reishi mushroom fruiting block. Typically this is called like a mushroom kit. They come in all different species and you can find them in reishi. So one good option is just to kind of Google reishi mushroom kit or reishi mushroom fruiting block, and you should be able to find one. I will put a link in the description of one person that I know that sells these. His name is Mike Tyson. He typically sells lion's mane kits on Instagram, but I know he also has reishi mushroom kits, and actually I've never used his kits, so I can't speak how well they work, but I know lots of people use them and he gets really great reviews on them. And fun fact, I actually got my reishi culture that I'm using to grow this one way back in 2015 on Reddit on a trade that I did with Mike Tyson. So although I haven't used his kits, I have used this culture. I'm sure he's got great kits. So I'll put that link in the description below if you want to skip the whole process of making your own fruiting blocks and just buy a pre-made kit. So step 2, once you have your fully colonized block, or once you have your reishi mushroom kit, step 2 is planting it. So you're not really planting it the same way that you'd be planting seeds. You're kind of just putting it in the dirt so that it kind of stays covered and stays humid. So take it completely out of the bag and put it in the dirt and then put a thin layer of dirt on top of it. Now, it doesn't have to be garden soil. It really doesn't matter too much exactly what you use for soil, as long as it can help retain the humidity. I'm sure different properties of the soil might end up having different properties of the mushrooms, but all the nutrients that the reishi mushroom needs to grow and needs to fruit is already contained inside that fruiting block. So again, the soil is just kind of covering and helps to kind of retain that humidity. Now, when we planted these, we actually did it on a live episode of FreshCap Friday Live. So I don't have great footage of it, but basically we just took a garden bed, like an elevated garden bed, and put the reishi in there and then covered it in the soil and in the dirt. And then on the other side of the garden bed, we actually planted some lettuce and stuff, which you'll see appear as these reishi mushrooms grow. Now, mushrooms need a lot of moisture to grow properly, and reishi is no different. So once these blocks were planted in the garden, we went ahead and soaked it down really good with water. Just make sure everything was fully hydrated, and then no dry soil would kind of pull moisture out of the block and prevent the block from fruiting. And the next step, just to help retain all that moisture, was to actually build the greenhouse part. And this was pretty simple. I'm sure you could do this a number of different ways, but the way we did it, we took some fencing and kind of snipped it all up and made a nice hoop to kind of cover the reishi, and then we took some poly sheeting, so just a thin plastic sheet, and covered that hoop to kind of act like a greenhouse. And then the final step was to take some shade cloth and drape it over that sheeting. Now, this does a number of things. Obviously, the poly sheeting helps kind of retain humidity inside of there, and we left both ends of it open so that there, you could get a little bit of airflow. But then we added the shade cloth on top, and what that does is prevents direct sunlight. It probably stops the inside of the greenhouse from overheating, but it also prevents any air coming in through the sides that might dry out your reishi. Because if it's too dry, your reishi mushrooms might not pin, and if they do pin and there's too much wind and too much direct sunlight, there's a really good chance that they'll just stop growing altogether. So this greenhouse with the poly sheeting and the shade cloth, keeping it humid in there, just creates a perfect humid, warm environment for the reishi mushroom pins to form, but also for the full conchs to grow. So once the reishi blocks are planted and your greenhouse is built, it's really just a waiting game. You don't have to do too much, and as long as the conditions inside the greenhouse are humid and warm, the reishi will just kind of do its thing. Eventually, after maybe a week or so, you'll start to see little tiny pins growing. These are kind of like, well, we call them antlers, and they're kind of like these little finger-like projections that shoot up straight from the block, and they almost kind of look like candy corn or something. But eventually those pins or those antlers will turn into conchs as long as they get enough fresh air. So that's what you'll see over the period of a week or so as the pins form, but then in the following weeks, those pins will start to flatten out and form those more recognizable reishi conchs. So really, once it's planted, just kind of set it and forget it, and just kind of watch your mushrooms grow. And it's really fun. Now, reishi grows a lot slower than other gourmet or medicinal mushrooms. So if this was something like oysters, they basically double in size every day once they start growing. Maybe not every day, but they basically double in size every day or every couple days, and they grow really fast. Whereas reishi, the growth is a lot slower, and it takes a few days to kind of notice any growth. But they are also really resilient. Like inside of that hut, we really didn't have to do anything. We didn't worry about contamination. There was other kind of weeds and other plants growing inside there, and the reishi was just kind of doing its thing. So yeah, just you want to make sure that it doesn't dry out. So every once in a while, maybe open it and kind of spray it down with a spray bottle. Other than keeping it humid, you basically just kind of wait and watch and see what the reishi mushrooms are doing. Now, for these particular mushrooms, it took about 6 or 7 weeks from planting them all the way to harvest. And you'll see that they're kind of done growing because eventually they have this kind of white leading edge on the edge of the conch, and eventually that will kind of slow down or get smaller, and that kind of signals to you that the reishi mushrooms aren't really growing anymore and maybe it's time for harvest. And the other sign you'll see that the reishi mushrooms are getting close to the end of the life cycle is that they'll drop the spores. And you'll notice this because there'll be spores kind of all over the inside of your greenhouse, but also because those spores will kind of drop down and land on top of the fruiting body. So the reishi mushroom changes from this nice, beautiful, shiny red color to kind of a more dull brown, rusty color. And that's the second sign that's going to let you know that your reishi mushrooms are getting close to harvest. Now, harvesting the mushrooms is pretty easy. Basically, all you want to do is take a nice serrated blade or saw and just kind of saw the mushrooms off as close as you can get to the top of the block. Now again, reishi mushrooms are tough, so you're not gonna be able to just pick them off with your hand. You really do kind of have to saw them, so it's a little more work than other mushrooms, but as long as you have a nice sharp blade or a saw, it's easy to get those mushrooms off. Now from these 6 blocks, we ended up getting about 650 grams of fresh reishi mushrooms, which is not an amazing yield, but when you consider that really all we had to do was plant them and set it and forget it, that's a pretty good haul of reishi mushrooms that you can grow yourself in the backyard with very little effort. Now, once they're harvested, you could just use them fresh by cutting them into slices and making a tea, but generally what's done is you dry them out, so put them on a screen or something and dry them out until they're completely dry, and then you can cut them into slices and store them in a jar or whatever, or use them to make tea in the future or make a tincture or something like that. But using the reishi mushrooms is something for another video. In this video, I just wanted to show you the process of growing the reishi mushrooms from start all the way to harvest. Now for reishi mushrooms, the opportunities to get a second flush or a second crop are definitely not as good as other mushrooms. I've never really had any luck getting a second flush off of reishi blocks, and for the most part, it's definitely kind of diminishing returns. So for this one, it's kind of just one shot. You grow them once, you harvest it, and then the blocks are ready for the compost pile. So like I said, there's a bunch of different ways you can grow reishi. There's a traditional method, there's this mini method that I showed you. You can also just grow them in normal fruiting chambers, and actually I've even just had them where I take blocks of reishi and just left them in my office, and they grow pretty nicely. But there are some kind of neat things that you can do as well. One of them that I wanted to show you was a reishi bonsai. So what they do is they grow reishi in normal fruiting bags, probably a little bit larger, and then the pins will just kind of go straight up. But as the reishi mushroom is growing, they'll kind of tie them together and form them, so they make this really cool reishi bonsai. And these are just really neat, the different formations that the reishi mushroom can grow, and they're kind of used as for decorative purposes, and they look really beautiful. The other thing you can do is to grow a giant reishi like this big one behind me. And this is not a single reishi mushroom fruiting body, although it looks like one single fruiting body. Basically what it is a bunch of fruiting bodies, and as it grows, the mushrooms are kind of trained to kind of all flatten out and grow together, and the end result is something that looks like a giant reishi, even though it is a bunch of them. So reishi mushroom is incredible in how it grows, and grow in all sorts of different ways. But again, this method that I'm showing you in this video, the natural mini greenhouse method, is by far one of the easiest. And if you have the chance, I highly recommend that you give it a try. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you like mushroom content, please be sure to subscribe. Also hit that notification bell so you're notified as soon as new videos come out. And also, if you have a second, please hit that like button as long as you like the video. That really helps the channel, and we appreciate it so much. So thanks so much for watching again, and I'm Tony from FreshCap Mushrooms, and we'll see you in the next video.